But Twitch does it, not my computer.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. It keeps it archived for like 14 days.
All right. Is it working okay?
Yep.
Sweet. I'm just gonna get some water.
I started doing this for a while, and people get so competitive. Like I don't mind if I never got I mean, for some it isn't fun. It's that serious. But I get it.
Like I just want to run around. I think it'd be cool if everything was like had to have like a certain level.
All of the little
Like a little. Yeah, exactly. That would be fun.
Because part of the fun of that is how it should be. Like
Right.
should be
Right. Like I want to be able to actually move around.
Wow. Freaking water. Water? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, let me just tweet about it. What is it? Twitch TV. Fucking dev.
Want to send out a tweet real quick?
Is the mic on?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Oh, that one.
Mike,
Look at this dog. Are you kidding
look
me?
at that dog. It's a good boy.
You should follow this Twitter account.
I've
That's what this workshop's about, actually. I've pet that dog.
It's a 9-year-old boy.
9-year-old boy, very playful. Um, Everything's good? Cool. Is the mic working?
Yeah. You want to get
Like,
closer?
is it projecting?
Yeah, just project.
I just can't. I can't tell.
Yeah,
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
It's on.
Okay, great.
Everybody, thanks for coming. Thanks for being patient with our technical difficulties. We really tried to prepare this time. Things have funny way worked out. We are streaming right now. And we did change this workshop last minute. I don't know if you didn't see the numbers, but it is now the workflow tools in Unity. The spine, animation spine workshop will be next. So sorry about that, but thank you for being awesome about it. Only announcement I really want to make is next Wednesday we have our general meetup in this room. I'll have a lot more announcements then. It'll be in this room 7 p.m. till 10. So come hang out if you want. And yeah, give Wes a hand for leading our workshop today. Thanks, Wes.
Thanks, PC.
Oh, yeah. One quick thing. Thank you. Tomorrow night, we have a collaboration between Rock Game Dev, Girl Development, and Rock Dev. It's now been moved to Lux Lounge at SoundPad. It's a social night to meet other developers, other software developers, other people in Rochester. So if you're around tomorrow night, 7 to 9 p.m. at Lux, we will be hanging out there. So come hang out. They're a good group. They come hang out here. We should do the same for them. So yeah, that's it. Info's on the Facebook page too. Cool.
Cool. Thanks for coming out, guys. I know it's summer and there are better things to do. If you're here to see spine stuff, that's great. I'm not going to do anything in spine. Noelle was supposed to. She's a little sick, so she couldn't make it. So I stepped in to do this workshop kind of last minute. And we're going to talk about the absolute opposite of doing stuff in spine, which is making tools to make games in Unity. This whole workshop is on my GitHub page. I'm going to post a link in the Discord. But all of like my notes and all the links to all my sources and all my inspiration and all the tutorials and manual stuff for all of this is on my GitHub. So if you want to follow along or if you want to check it out later, find it there. For those who don't know me, I'm Wesley Rockholz. I'm the workshop coordinator here, and I'm also a developer at Working Man. I make a lot of games in Unity, which means that I also make a lot of tools in Unity, because making big games means that you need to make tools to build content. Building tools, building games is time consuming, so you want to make tools that help you get there. I always make blacksmithing analogies, even though I know nothing about blacksmithing. I always say that like building a game without tools is like trying to like forge swords without a hammer. But I actually really have no idea if you even use hammers when you blacksmith. I just like have seen Lord of the Rings, so I think there's like that one scene where the elf is like building a sword.
Usually the first thing you do in blacksmithing is make your own blacksmithing fire. So.
Oh, really?
It's like a perfect analogy.
That's a great analogy then. Awesome. Sweet. But the whole point of this workshop is that like a lot of times when you see game tools like level editors and stuff, they're like at AAA studios because they have to build their own engines and then they build their own tools for the engines. But I just want to emphasize that tools aren't just for AAA titles. We can make small tools throughout the development process, or we can make medium-sized or big tools if we need them, and that you can build tools kind of in parallel with your development process, especially with Unity, because Unity provides so many ways of doing that. So this workshop is kind of directed at people who are generalists or indies that want to learn about what Unity offers for tools and making them alongside your game. And one quick note before I get started. I was going through what I was going to say in this workshop, and I used the word serialization like twice a sentence. So I just want to clarify what that word means, because it's going to come up a lot. And so I want to start the workshop by defining serialization, and it's the process of formatting data so that it can be stored or transmitted. So basically what most tools do is take data, allow you to edit it in some visual way, and then serialize the data so that a game can read it. That's like the whole process of what a tool does behind the scenes. I've got a lot of inspiration for tools. One that's really close to home is, this is going to be terrible. This is going to be really loud. The Warcraft 3 editor is like my absolute bread and butter. I started making games in this engine, in this tool. So I just wanted to bring it up and show it because it's kind of like where all my inspiration for tools comes from. So like this is an example of a big AAA tool in games. It's like a level editor where you can paint terrain and you can paint props and you can set up where the spawns are and where the enemies like stand and how they animate and how they path. And you can set up where the players spawn and all that stuff. And so this is like a tool that hooks into the game's graphics engine, draws stuff exactly the way that it looks in the game, but enables the designer to make stuff and prevents all of this editing software from entering the game. So you'll see this person's now testing their custom level in the game. This is the same tool. They released this obviously for modders to use, but this is the same tool that the developers use when they're making the game. This is obviously now the StarCraft, has evolved into the StarCraft 2 editor, which is a lot prettier. I won't show that, that's fine. Some other quick inspirations, like another example of a good tool that we use at Working Man a lot is like Texture Packer, which is, I wanted to pick some boring tools because like even stuff like Maya and Photoshop, they're all technically tools that we use to make games with. So this is a tool that takes your sprites and packs them into sprite sheets for you. And if you were to do that process by hand, or if you were to not do that process, your game would be, it would be less performant, or it would be harder to make. Some example, easy feedback. Noah right here made a tool to help QA people's games. So like you can open up a form in the game and report feedback to the devs, and that's something that like anybody testing the game can use. Come on, Unity. They've updated their privacy policy. But like, it's something that lots of players can use, but it's also something that like at a big studio, a QA team might use. Some Twitter people that make good tools, Chevy Ray, actually made a tool called Crunch that I used at Working Man for a while. That's also an open source texture packer. This guy's got some cool tools. Also, I'm going to butcher this guy's name, but I think it's Stephen Hovelbrinks. This guy makes beautiful, beautiful tools in Unity for himself to use while he's making his game Death Trash. Hopefully this GIF loads. If we're lucky, we'll get to see one of his tools. This guy makes some gorgeous level editors. If this GIF ever loads. Does RET like stop paying for Wi-Fi in the summer or something? Yeah? Okay. Maybe I'm gonna give up after this. Oh well. Well, it's in the GitHub. You can check it out. So I think that like one of the reasons that I don't see a lot of tools in the like AA or the indie space is because people don't know that they can make them or why they should make them, and they don't think to. So I like to start with like asking some questions like why would you make a tool, so that you can figure out where to identify in your workflow that you need to make a tool. One of the biggest reasons you would make one is to automate something. So like maybe before you release your game or before you build your game, you like copy a bunch of images into a release bin, or you like take off all your debug flags or something. And if that's something you do by hand every time, not only is it time consuming, but you can also make big mistakes that can end up in your builds. So maybe you want to automate that instead. You want to add technical support, stuff for debugging, stuff for QA, like easy feedback. Maybe you just want to tweak the way that the engine works. Like maybe you want it to import textures and compress them or something instead of just importing them raw. Or maybe you want to create an interface for designing content, which is going to be what most of this workshop's about. Creating interfaces for people to make stuff in. An example of an interface would be something like the Warcraft 3 editor, where you have a separate application that a designer opens, and then they design their level, and then it goes in the game. That's like an interface. So I've already written a bunch of stuff in Unity that I'm going to use as examples, so I'm not spending the majority of the time up here coding. But I tried to minimize it to like what exactly you need to get started with this stuff. The first thing that I always recommend people get started with is just learning about the C# attributes that Unity provides. And I'll show you guys what that is. The first example is menu items, which like everybody uses all the time. Up in Unity or up in any application at the top of, like here I'm on OS X, and it's the same thing on Windows, right? They've got like the file, edit, assets, game object, like way up in the corner up here. And you can actually, like a really, really minimal tool would be to add a menu item that does something. So in this case, I've got this menu item function class. Can you guys see that? Yeah? Okay, all right, cool. So I've got this menu item function class that's just static. It just has functions. I'm using this namespace Unity editor, which when I do this, Unity is going to make sure that this script doesn't get included in my builds. So any code that I write will never make it into a build. It'll prevent it. If it somehow does, it'll give you an error before it spits out of the build. And then I've got this function do system menu thing, and it's going to log out the current time and date. And if I want to turn it into a menu item, I use an attribute. So above the function declaration, I use like the square brackets and I say menu item, and then I give it a name. So like file custom do the thing. And then when I do that, it's just one line of code. When Unity gets back in, it's going to spin and compile. And then all of a sudden, I have file, custom, and do the thing, which is not going to let me do because it sucks. And when I hit it, it's going to print out the date time. So that's like, I consider that like the minimal like example of a tool, right? Like I need something for some reason to spit out the date time. And so maybe I'll just make a menu item to do it. Maybe all it is an action. Some things that I've like added there is like maybe I just need to open a window, or I want to have a button that like compresses all my assets in a different way. That's just like the simplest way to do it, is to add a menu item. And this right here is like this square bracket thing over some sort of C# declaration is called a property. And there's a whole list of all the properties, the editor properties that Unity provides, linked in the GitHub. So we're going to use those properties a lot. That's pretty much all that I'm going to do in this workshop. The next one is, so I've got this weapon definition class. So let's say I'm making an RPG, and we've got a designer who's going to work on just weapons. They're just going to make swords and shields and axes and whatever. So we've got this plain old data class. It's got a weapon. A weapon has damage. It has a type that can either be a sword, an axe, or a bow. It's got a Boolean that says, is it two-handed? So maybe it's a two-handed sword or a two-handed bow. I think that's required. And then a rarity. So like, you know, good old Warcraft rarities. We've got trash, common, uncommon, rare, epic, and legendary. So this is like, if we were going to design like an iron sword, we might name it an iron sword, give it like 5 damage, give it the weapon type sword. Maybe it's two-handed, maybe it's not, and then it's got a rarity of like common or something because you can buy it. And typically, like one of the first like the amateur ways I see of declaring data like this as a designer is to like have some startup script that has like a giant list of all the weapons in the game, and you just hard code them. But a better way to do that is to make it so that your designers can do that in like some sort of interface. So here I extended scriptable object, which tells Unity that I want to be able to store this class as an asset, and I want to be able to load it and unload it at certain times, and I want my designers to be able to edit it. So if I ever want to create this thing, I can add a property that's create menu, asset menu, and then I think there's file name, so I can say like new weapon, and then menu item or menu name, which will be like custom / weapon definition. And so this is just a plain old data class, but now when I go back into Unity and I let it compile, I've got all my other weapon definitions here. But I can right click in the assets and go to create and then custom and then weapon definition. And it'll make a new one for me. And we can see we've got our new weapon, and then over on the right we can see its damage, its weapon type, whether it's two-handed or whether it's rare. So now if we've got a designer, or if later down the road when I'm done programming and I just want to spit out like take a Saturday and spit out 200 weapons. I can do it in this interface. I don't even have to look at code. So if we want to make a weapon, I don't know, let's make a iron axe, and we'll give it 5 damage. We'll make it an axe. Maybe it's two-handed, and maybe it's common. So Unity not only generated a way for us to store the data and to create the object, it also gave us like a pre-generated interface that our designers can use to actually assign the data. And that's something that we're going to be able to tweak in a little bit. Another good one is, what else can we do? Let's see. Character definition. So we've got another scriptable object, a character definition. So characters maybe have level, race, class. Maybe they also have a rarity, like they show up rarely or something. There's some sort of rare creature or character. And then they've got a weapon that they wield. And then they've got a function that gets their total damage. So like the total damage that a character deals is their level times their weapon's damage. Just like arbitrary. This is one of your designers decided this at some point, and they added that to the game. Weapons are private, maybe because there's some sort of implementation detail, like they can't be accessed from a script. They're private. So if we look at the editor for characters, I made Aragorn here. We see that we can edit his level. We have drop downs for his race, his class, and his rarity. This is all stuff that Unity just made for us. But we noticed that like weapon didn't show up, right? Because weapon's private. But let's say that I want to expose weapon to my designers, just not to other programmers. You can add this field called serialized field. And now it'll show up. If you give it a sec. So now my designers can assign weapons to characters, right? So they can just take the iron axe that we just made and drag it into the weapon, and now Aragorn has an iron axe. And so like this is another tool that you can use to like tweak the way that Unity works and the way that it exposes stuff to your designers. Another one is like they provide a lot of fields or properties for just tweaking the way that the inspector displays stuff. So like let's say that the level, for example, is always going to be between 1 and 10, or 1 and 20, 1 in the level cap. So I don't want my designers to be able to set it above that. So another property that you can use is range over a field, and you can say I want it between 1 and level cap. And this will tell Unity that when it generates this inspector for us to use a slider, a range slider, for the level. So now I can just drag it around and it'll snap to integers, and it'll also tell me exactly what it is. But it will prevent my designers from creating some data that's illegal, right? So that's something that like, if we were just using code, if we were giving our designers the option to define this stuff in code, they could make a mistake like that. They could set the character's level to 30, which is technically like not handled. So we can use tools to prevent that. Another one is like a header. So like if we want to add a label, we can do like header, like, I don't know, stats or something. And then when we go back in the inspector, we'll see that a little bold label will appear wherever I put that header. And it'll give me some space. So you can just do some simple stuff to tweak the way that your inspector works. And like I said, the whole point of this is that these are all one-line changes. So you can do this while you're programming if you want to add tools along the way. What else we got? If we want to go farther and we want to actually make our own interfaces or add stuff to them, Unity also gives us like total control over that. We can make our own inspectors, we can make our own windows, we can make our own buttons. So one of the things that like one of the like quick tips that I always show people because I love it is that if you have like some sort of class, like for example our weapon definition, and it's a scriptable object. If we look in our data folder, like we've got all this stuff that's like some characters, some weapons, and like there's no way to indicate. Like we could put them in separate folders, I guess, if we wanted to, but it doesn't really tell us what they are. So if you go to the script that you write, and you go to this little icon up in the corner up here, you can hit select icon and then other, and you can give it, like I think I picked weapons, right? So I'll give it this weapons icon. And then when I go back to my data, it shows up in the list like that. So I can give custom icons to assets. So if I just have weapons designers or something and I want to make their workspace a little brighter or help them find stuff faster, I can do stuff like that. You can also search. When you're in the search field, you can type T for type and then weapon definition, and only weapons will show up. So that's kind of handy. Another thing that we can do is Unity generates these inspectors for us. So like if you look at Anduril, it's got this pre-generated inspector that takes integers and it gives us an int field for them. It takes our weapon type, which is an enum, and it makes a drop down for it. Booleans, it turns into a check mark. It's just all automated by Unity. But let's say that we want to totally replace that, and our designer comes to us and says that I want to see at the bottom of this inspector the total damage that this character is going to deal with the weapon that they have equipped, which isn't showing up. Oh yeah, here it is. So the character, for example, my designer wants to see the total damage, which that function said that it was the level times the weapon damage, but it isn't visualized anywhere. So I wrote, just to speed up time, this custom inspector, which to do this, you just extend the class editor that Unity provides, and you override this function called onInspectorGUI. And what that does is it lets you just totally control, like a blank canvas, the rendering of that inspector. So in this case, I'm going to get the character definition that it's targeting, the one that's selected. I'm going to create a label style and make it bold. And then I'm going to get the character's total damage and put it in a string, and then I'm going to display it as a label. And to make it work, I have to add a property called custom editor, and then give it the type that I want it to inspect, which is going to be a character. Nope. And then when I go back to Unity, it's going to draw the default inspector because I asked it to, maybe, if we're lucky. There we go. Sweet. So it draws the default inspector like I asked it to, and I called the base function. And then it also displays the total damage down there in the bold style that we asked for. So you could, if you wanted to, like totally overwrite the entire inspector. You could make it visual. You could use a camera. You could put like a whole scene in there. You could display images. You can do whatever you want. But just so that you guys know that that's available to you, I'm not going to go through how to do all that stuff. What else? What else can we do? Another thing is, like, for example, if we look at our classes, our character and our weapon, they both use this rarity. And so, totally arbitrarily, let's say that our designer says that, and I guess this is reasonable, they don't want to click twice. They don't want to click on the drop down and then click again on the rarity. And they also feel like this is an overwhelming interface. So what they want is buttons that shows the rarities and all their colors, and they just want to click a button to set the rarity. But you'll notice that there's a problem. Like, we could overwrite the inspector and draw that ourselves. But rarity is used in multiple classes. So what if we want rarity to show up the same way across all the different like types that use it? Unity provides a class called property drawer for that. So I've written one called rarity property drawer. This one's got to get a little smaller. So again, I extend a class that Unity gives us called property jar. And it gives us a similar function called onGUI that lets us render the GUI, the graphical user interface. And it also provides another function that returns a float called getPropertyHeight, which lets us have it take up more height in the inspector, this particular property, the rarity property. So in this case, I want twice the height, just because I want it. I want some extra room for the buttons. And then you guys can go back and look at this code later, but basically what it does is it gets all the possible rarities. It decides that each of the buttons is going to take up a certain amount of width in the row, and then it draws each of those buttons. It gives if the button is selected, it gives it a background color for the rarity, and if it's not selected, it gives the button the text color. And then it's got a label on it, which is the first letter of the rarity. And so to make this work, we just need a property, which is custom property drawer. Let me give it the type. No. And so now every time we see rarity on our interface, it's going to use this property jar instead. Maybe, if we're lucky. As usual. Yeah. So rather than having this drop down, we now have this set of buttons that our designer can just go in and click on and set the rarity of something. So this is like uncommon, common, what is that, epic? And yeah, so this all this stuff is going to get saved for us, and then when it goes in the game, we can see that those changes reflected. But yeah, that's about it. Also, I wanted to point out that you can, if you want to make a full-fledged tool like a level editor, or you want to make something like the shader graph that they just released, you can extend editor window and just make your own window and treat it like an HTML canvas or something, and make your own tool in that. But that's it. That's all I wanted to talk about. I just wanted to show you guys those options that you have when you're working in Unity. And if you have any questions for me, more specific stuff, let me know and I can answer them. Again, you can find all this stuff on my GitHub, and I'll post that in the Discord. All this info is there, all the links, all that good stuff. So yeah, cool.
So when deciding to make a tool, like is there a line where especially if you're a solo dev or small,
Yeah.
where it's like, is this going to be worth the time I invest? Is it going to save me time?
Yeah. I mean, like that's the big question of making tools, right? You have to decide at some point like whether your risk of human error when you're doing something repetitive is worth not making a tool for. If it makes your life easier, then you should just make the tool. Like that's what they're there for. I feel like I'm kind of like attuned to making them. Like I've done it so much that it kind of comes naturally to me. So I make a lot more tools than probably the average developer does, like while I'm working. But you also kind of want to like look at your game and your scope. Think about not just the systems that you have to make, but also the content that you have to make. And you have to decide whether you have so much content in your game that it warrants making a tool for. So like, for example, on Adventure Guild, we knew that we were going to have a ton of content. And that making levels in that game without some sort of visual editor was going to be impossible. So we made level editors and all that stuff for another designer to use. If you're making it for somebody else, it's like you have to do it. If you're making it for yourself, you kind of have to make a judgment call. So, yeah. What's up?
Can you carry them forward to new projects, or what do you make them every time?
It depends on what you make. Like at Working Man, we make a lot of tools that are generic because we move on from projects so often that a lot of our the tools that we write in house have to be generic in that way, right? They just have to be Unity tools. But if you're on a really, really big single game that's going to take 5 years to make, you might want to make tools that aren't generic and don't get carried from game to game because they need to be so niche that you often want to take shortcuts. Like I know, for example, those Blizzard editor tools, like the World Editor, is like Windows only because they only work on in-house on Windows machines. So if they were ever to move over to Mac, they would have to rewrite all those tools. But you have to think about your situation and what you're making the tools for. But you could make them generic. They might not treat the same data. Like, for example, we were making like RPG weapon and character stuff, but that might not carry over to like a shooter. It really depends on what you're doing.
At what point would you decide to make tools in Unity as opposed to like external tools that perhaps more like if you're sourcing this information?
Yeah, sure. So I don't know if the stream probably didn't hear it. So the question was, how do you decide whether you make a tool in Unity or whether to make a separate application and load the data in that comes from the tool? I kind of use the phrase whether it's close to the game or not. So if your tool needs to use stuff like the scenes in Unity, or if it needs to work with prefabs, or if it needs to use the cameras in the scene to render stuff so that like an artist can work with the terrain and props and all that stuff, I would build it in Unity because you have access to Unity's graphics engine. If you're writing your own graphics engine, you might be able to hot swap it into your tool. But if it's close to the game, I would use Unity. Also, if you just happen to not really have that skill set or don't really have like a reason to build a separate tool, then just build it in Unity because it's convenient. Like that was like the purpose of this workshop in particular was to show you that it's really convenient to make the tools in Unity. But at the same time, like if let's say your designers don't know Unity, you might not want to make the tool in Unity. Or if they're working on a particular, like if they're working only on Windows, you can take advantage of Windows only software, make faster tools or something. You have to make judgment calls on how much time you have, what kind of code you want to write, what kind of skills you have, how much money you want to spend on it. Yeah, that's true. But I mean, I've used like WPF to make tools, Windows Forms, even like Python and stuff. I would say also like for a lot of the like super small like file operation stuff or like uploading stuff to servers or like really really small tasks, you can probably use like Bash or like a scripting language for. You don't always have to do that stuff in Unity. But yeah, having your head wrapped around what languages are good for what stuff is also pretty helpful. So, yeah. Any questions from the chat? Chat. Cool. Sweet, half an hour. Blew through it. Yeah. Any other questions? Sweet. Thanks, guys. I'll be around. We have plenty of time. Another hour. Yeah. Yeah.
We got some events